Ethan Reyes had seen the world collapse before his very eyes, but nothing prepared him for the horrors that lay ahead. He crouched behind an overturned sedan, gripping a bloodied crowbar, his breath shallow. The once bustling streets of Crestwood were now a graveyard, but the dead weren't content with staying still. The outbreak had started 3 weeks ago, spreading faster than the government could control. A failed military quarantine led to Crestwood being completely sealed off, left to rot with its infected populace. The city had become a death trap, abandoned cars, shattered windows, and the smell of decay that clung to everything. Ethan had survived this long by staying sharp, moving only at night, and never trusting anyone. He had a single goal: get out of the city. But with every exit blocked, his only chance was to find a working radio and contact the outside world. That meant heading toward the Crestwood Emergency Broadcast Center, deep within the city, right through the heart of the undead nightmare. A low groan echoed from the alleyway beside him. Ethan tightened his grip on the crowbar and peeked around the car. A corpse in tattered hospital scrubs shambled forward, its dead eyes locked onto him. Behind it, another figure emerged, then another. "Shit," he muttered. More were coming. Ethan bolted down the street, his boots crunching over broken glass. He needed a safe place, somewhere to catch his breath. He spotted an old hardware store with its metal shutter partially open. It was risky, but better than being caught in the open. He ducked inside, pushing aside scattered tools and debris. The air was thick with dust, but it was empty, at least for now. He slid the shutter down, plunging the store into near darkness. That's when he heard it. A faint rustling. Not the wind. Something was in here with him. Ethan froze, listening. A soft dragging sound, the scrape of nails against wood. Then, a voice. "Please, don't make a sound." His heart pounded. He turned toward the sound, spotting a woman huddled behind the counter. She looked terrified, clutching a makeshift spear, a broom handle with a knife duct-taped to the end. Her blonde hair was matted with dirt, her green eyes wide with fear. Ethan raised his hands slowly. "Not here to hurt you." The woman didn't lower her weapon. "Then be quiet. They're right outside." Ethan crept forward and knelt beside her. "Name's Ethan." She hesitated, then whispered, "Lena." A loud thud against the shutter made them both jump. Then another. Groaning followed. Shadows moved outside the dusty glass windows. The dead had followed him. Ethan clenched his jaw. If they didn't get out soon, this store would become their tomb. And the real horror was only beginning. The pounding against the metal shutter grew louder, the groans of the dead turning into a hungry chorus. Ethan and Lena exchanged a look. They had to move. Lena clutched her makeshift spear tighter. "There's a back exit," she whispered. "But if they hear us..." Crash. The store window shattered. A rotting hand clawed through the jagged glass, followed by another. "No more time. Go. Now." Ethan hissed, yanking Lena toward the back. They sprinted through the narrow aisles, knocking over shelves in their rush. The rear door loomed ahead, slightly ajar. Ethan cursed under his breath. It was already open. Had someone come through? Or was something waiting? He pushed Lena through first, gripping his crowbar in case something lunged at them. But the alley behind the store was empty, at least for now. "Where do we go?" Lena panted, looking around in panic. Ethan scanned their surroundings. The alley stretched in both directions, but only one way led deeper into the city. The other led toward the barricades, and the hordes that gathered there. "We stick to side streets," Ethan decided. "We need to get to the emergency broadcast center." Lena gave him a skeptical look. "That place is probably crawling with them." "Yeah. But if there's any chance of getting out of this city, it's there." She hesitated, then nodded. A sharp shriek made them both spin around. One of the infected had spotted them. A teenage girl, her flesh gray and torn, her mouth gaping in an unnatural way, sprinted toward them on all fours like a rabid animal. Not like the others. Ethan barely had time to react before the thing leaped. He swung the crowbar with full force, crack. The creature's skull caved in, but it still thrashed, its hands clawing at his leg. Lena drove her spear through its neck, pinning it to the pavement. It gurgled once, then went still. Ethan breathed heavily, yanking Lena away before more could come. That wasn't normal. Lena's face was pale. They're changing. A fresh wave of groans rose in the distance. The sound of death, closing in. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. Then we move faster. Because if the dead were evolving, then the true horror was only just beginning. Ethan and Lena sprinted through the alleyways, their breaths ragged as the undead swarmed the streets behind them. The city felt like a giant maze, every path leading to more corpses, more death. But it wasn't just the sheer number of zombies that terrified them, it was the way some of them moved. Lena kept glancing over her shoulder, her grip tightening around her spear. That thing, what the hell was that? Ethan shook his head. I don't know. I've never seen one move like that before. The normal ones were slow, shambling, predictable. But that girl, she had hunted them. And that meant things were getting worse. They reached a crossroads, one road leading toward a collapsed building, the other toward a row of abandoned houses. The city was silent, but that didn't mean it was safe. Ethan took a deep breath. We need higher ground. If we can find a rooftop, we can get a better look at the streets. Lena hesitated. And if there's more of those things up there? We deal with it. A sharp howl echoed from the distance, a sound so unnatural it sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. It wasn't the groan of a normal zombie. It was something else. Lena's eyes widened. That's new. Ethan grabbed her wrist. Move. Now. They rushed toward a 3-story apartment building, its entrance half collapsed but still accessible. They climbed over broken furniture, past blood-streaked walls, and up the stairs. The building was eerily quiet, but that only made it worse. At the top floor, they found an open window leading to the fire escape. Ethan went first, stepping onto the creaking metal. The city stretched before them, and what they saw made his blood run cold. Crestwood was overrun, but at the heart of the city, near the emergency broadcast center, something was happening. The zombies weren't just aimlessly wandering. They were gathering, forming a massive horde, as if being called to one place. And then he saw them. Dark figures moving between the hordes, their motions too coordinated, too purposeful. Some were hunched, their spines twisted unnaturally. Others moved with eerie grace, watching, waiting. Lena gripped his arm. Tell me I'm seeing things. Ethan's jaw tightened. No. You're not. This wasn't just an outbreak. Something else was controlling them. And whatever it was waiting for them to make a mistake. Ethan and Lena crouched low on the fire escape, eyes locked on the horror unfolding in the streets below. The undead weren't moving mindlessly anymore. They were shifting, flowing toward the city's heart like a slow, grotesque river. And those things, the ones that moved differently, almost intelligently, were guiding them. Lena swallowed hard. I don't like this, Ethan. Neither do I. He gripped the crowbar tighter, scanning the city for their next move. But we need to get to that broadcast center. Whatever's happening, that place is the key. Lena exhaled sharply. Fine. But we need a plan that doesn't involve us getting ripped apart. Before Ethan could respond, a sound froze them both. Clank. 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 A slow, deliberate noise. Metal tapping against metal. It was coming from inside the building. Lena's grip on her spear tightened. "We're not alone." Ethan motioned for her to stay low as he peered back into the apartment. The dimly lit hallway stretched ahead, eerily still, except for the rhythmic tapping coming from the stairwell. Then, it stepped into view. At first glance, it looked human, a tall figure in ragged clothes, its face obscured by a hood. But the way it moved was wrong, its limbs too loose, its posture unnatural. And in its hand, it clutched a long, rusted pipe, tapping it against the floor as it walked. Lena whispered, "Is that?" The figure snapped its head toward them. With an inhuman lurch, it charged. Ethan barely had time to react. He yanked Lena back as the thing slammed against the fire escape, its hood falling away, revealing a face that wasn't quite human. Its eyes were milky white, but there was something behind them. Not mindless hunger, awareness. And then, it spoke. Not words, not in the way a living person would, but a guttural, distorted rasp that sent ice down Ethan's spine. It was trying to form speech, trying to communicate. Lena gasped. "What the hell is that?" Ethan didn't wait to find out. He swung the crowbar with all his strength, crack, sending the thing reeling. But it didn't go down. It let out a sound, something between a hiss and a growl, and lunged again. Ethan grabbed Lena's arm. "We run. Now." They scrambled down the fire escape as the creature twisted unnaturally, forcing its way through the window frame, its bones snapping and realigning to fit. Ethan and Lena hit the alley below, sprinting just as a new sound rose in the night, a chorus of responding growls. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't alone. And worse, it was hunting them. Ethan and Lena ran, their boots pounding against the cracked pavement as the growls echoed behind them. The city had felt like a graveyard before, but now it was something far worse, a hunting ground. And they were the prey. They zigzagged through back alleys, jumping over debris and ducking through abandoned storefronts, but the thing chasing them never stopped. It moved with a terrifying mix of human agility and something unnatural, its distorted limbs bending too far, its movements twitchy yet purposeful. Lena glanced back and nearly stumbled. "It's still coming." Ethan cursed under his breath. "It's tracking us." It wasn't just following blindly. It was tracking. Hunting. A rusted dumpster sat near the alley's end. Ethan grabbed Lena's wrist and yanked her behind it, pressing them both against the cold metal. He signaled for silence, his heart hammering. The growls grew closer. Then, silence. Ethan held his breath. His muscles tensed, every fiber of his being screaming to run. But he knew better. This wasn't a normal zombie, they couldn't just outrun it. A slow clank echoed through the alley. The sound of metal tapping against concrete. The thing was listening. Lena clenched her jaw, gripping her makeshift spear so tightly her knuckles turned white. Ethan barely dared to breathe. A shadow loomed over the dumpster. Then, a raspy, guttural whisper. A distorted mockery of human speech. "See, you." Ethan reacted on instinct. He grabbed a loose brick and hurled it down the alley. It clattered against the pavement. The creature snapped its head toward the noise, and in that moment of distraction, Ethan grabbed Lena's hand and ran. They burst from the alley into an old gas station parking lot, sprinting toward the nearest building. The back door was ajar, probably already looted, but right now, shelter was shelter. Ethan shoved the door open, pulling Lena inside just as the creature shrieked. It had figured them out. Ethan slammed the door shut, locking it just as something slammed into it from the other side. The entire frame shook. Lena staggered backward, breathing hard. What the hell was that? What was it saying? Ethan leaned against the door, trying to catch his breath. "It's learning." Lena's face paled. Learning? A second thud hit the door, then another. And then, silence. Ethan's grip tightened on his crowbar. He didn't trust it. Not for a second. Then, from somewhere inside the building, they heard another voice. A human one. "Don't move," the voice whispered. "If it knows you're here, you're already dead." Ethan and Lena froze. The real horror was only just beginning. Ethan and Lena stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. The voice had come from deeper inside the gas station, hidden in the shadows. Ethan tightened his grip on the crowbar. "Who's there?" he whispered. A figure slowly emerged, a man, mid-40s, gaunt but alert. He held a pistol, but his hands were steady, his eyes sharp. He wore a tattered jacket and had a deep gash on his left cheek. "The name's Carter," he murmured. "If you're smart, you'll keep your voices down. That thing outside? It's not just another corpse. It's worse." Lena glanced at the trembling door. "We already figured that part out." Carter studied them, then motioned them forward. "Come with me. Now." Ethan hesitated but nodded. They followed Carter through a narrow hallway into a hidden stockroom. Inside were supplies, food, water, even a few weapons. This wasn't just a random survivor, Carter had been preparing. Ethan turned to him. "You know what those things are, don't you?" Carter exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "Not everything. But I know enough to tell you this city isn't just lost, it's been claimed." Lena frowned. "Claimed? By what?" Carter pulled out an old radio and turned the dial. Static crackled. Then, faintly, a voice. A distorted, inhuman voice. "More will come." The three of them stiffened. Carter shut off the radio, his face grim. "That's not just noise. That's them." Ethan's stomach turned. "You're saying they can communicate?" Carter nodded. "Not like us. But they understand each other. They're organizing." Lena sat down hard. "This isn't just a zombie outbreak, is it?" Carter shook his head. "No. Something is controlling them. And if we don't get out of this city soon, we're not just going to die. We're going to be part of it." A loud boom rattled the building. The thing outside had found another way in. Carter stood, cocking his pistol. "Time's up. You coming with me or not?" Ethan and Lena exchanged a look. They didn't trust Carter yet, but staying here meant death. Ethan nodded. "Lead the way." They grabbed their weapons and followed Carter into the unknown, while behind them, something in the shadows watched, and waited. Ethan, Lena, and Carter moved quickly through the back exit of the gas station, slipping into the night as the city around them groaned with the movements of the dead. But it wasn't just the usual aimless shuffling, the infected were moving with purpose. "They're hurting us," Carter whispered as they ducked into a ruined subway entrance. His grip on his pistol tightened. "They know where we are." Lena shook her head. "That's impossible. They're zombies." Carter shot her a grim look. "Not anymore." They descended into the dark tunnels, their footsteps echoing against the damp concrete. The smell of rot and stagnant water filled the air. They flicked on their flashlights, revealing graffiti-covered walls and abandoned tracks. Then Ethan froze. The walls weren't just covered in graffiti. They were covered in symbols. Strange, twisting markings, drawn in something dark, too dark to just be spray paint. Lena swallowed. "What is this?" Carter knelt beside one of the markings, tracing it with his fingers. "I've seen this before. Before the city fell, people started whispering about something strange happening in the hospitals, the morgues. The first infected, they weren't just sick." Ethan tightened his jaw. "Then what were they?" Carter stood up, looking ahead. They were being changed. Something is controlling them, something old, something that was buried here long before the city was built. A deep, inhuman groan echoed through the tunnels. Ethan turned his flashlight down the tracks, and his blood ran cold. A group of infected stood in the tunnel ahead. But they weren't moving yet. They were just standing there, swaying, waiting. And behind them, deep in the darkness, something massive was shifting. Then came the voice, whispering from all directions. Not just one voice. Hundreds. Thousands. Lena gasped, clutching her head. It's in my head. Carter grabbed her, pulling her forward. Don't listen. Move. The first infected twitched to life and began sprinting toward them. Behind them, a shape emerged, something so grotesque and twisted it barely resembled a human form anymore. And for the first time, Ethan realized the truth. They weren't just fighting zombies. They were fighting something that had been waiting beneath this city for centuries. And now, it was awake. Run, he screamed, as the darkness swallowed them whole. Ethan, Lena, and Carter ran. The subway tunnel shook with the force of something massive moving behind them. The groaning voices of the infected swelled into a monstrous chorus, their footsteps slamming against the concrete in unison. And above it all, the whispering continued. It wasn't just inside their heads anymore. It was real. Surrounding them. Calling to them. Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed forward, dodging loose rails and debris. There has to be a maintenance exit. A ladder, something. There is. Carter called back. About 100 yards ahead, if we can make it. Lena gasped as the first of the infected lunged at her. She barely dodged, jabbing her spear into its throat. But before she could pull back, another grabbed her from behind. Lena. Ethan turned, his crowbar swinging. Crack. The infected skull shattered, and Lena stumbled free, panting. But more were coming. Too many. And behind them, the thing in the dark loomed closer. Ethan saw it. Just for a moment. A shape impossible to describe. Not just one body. Hundreds, maybe thousands, all fused together. Pulsing. Wriggling. Twisting. It wasn't just controlling the infected. It was the source. Carter reached the ladder first and climbed fast. Move, move, move. Lena went next, scrambling up just as the first infected slammed into the base, their hands clawing, grabbing. Ethan climbed last, yanking himself up just as cold, rotting fingers brushed against his ankle. Carter reached the top and shoved the hatch open, pulling Lena through. Ethan was right behind them, then he heard it. That voice. Stay with us. Ethan turned, and saw something horrible. The infected weren't just climbing. They were changing. Their skin twisted, merging into one another, forming a mass of flesh reaching for him. Absorbing everything in its path. Ethan. Lena grabbed his arm and yanked him through the hatch just as Carter slammed it shut. They collapsed onto the pavement, gasping. They had made it. But the city was no longer the same. The horde was everywhere, thousands of them, all moving toward one place. Lena clutched Ethan's arm, shaking. It's spreading. Carter reloaded his pistol. It's not just a zombie outbreak. It's a goddamn invasion. Ethan looked at the skyline. The emergency broadcast center was still standing, its radio tower blinking in the distance. Maybe there was still a way out. Maybe there was still hope. But deep below, in the tunnels beneath the city, the true horror was only just beginning. And it wasn't going to stop. Not until everything was part of it. The end.